Welcome to another episode of Seeing Them Live, a podcast featuring memorable concert stories from live music fans. Everyone has a concert story, and hopefully, one day, we'll hear yours.
And Sebastian, I guess, was also probably taken a little bit aback, was sort of like, "Oh, Dave, this is Benny. He's a really big fan of yours," which I don't know if that's what you're supposed to say when you get introduced to rock stars. I don't know. But he was like, "Oh, man," and he mumbled something. And I was just like, "Oh, man, this is not a good moment."
Today's guest is Benny, who makes music under the name Muted Circus. Benny is a musician, producer, and songwriter based in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up in Orange County, California, and then went to Boston and attended the Berklee College of Music, and eventually moved to Tokyo, Japan, where he lived for 7 years. Muted Circus is a 10 EP, 50-song project about the death of Benny's father. Benny's father was a visual artist, and his artwork appears on each of the album covers. Benny is also a live music fan. Benny, welcome to Seeing Them Live.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for coming on. You got some cool stories and some cool music that you make. And I just want to let listeners know that you will be playing a pared down version of one of your songs.
That's right. I'm excited.
Yeah, I saw one of your tags describing some of your music as psychedelic folk music.
Yeah, there's a bit of that in there for sure.
I've listened to it, and there is definitely a lot of interesting things going on there. But Benny, I thought we'd just start with your first concert.
Sure.
Going back to when you were 13 years old, and this is when you were living in California.
That's right, yeah. So Orange County had a really vibrant music scene, and it had major venues and also those sort of indie venues that you could imagine. It makes sense in a certain way because it's kind of halfway between San Diego and Los Angeles, and it has a lot of population density. So it sort of made sense that a lot would be going on there. Plus you have a certain amount of garage space. And so you have all these bands like No Doubt comes from that sort of general area, and just dozens and dozens of other bands, including entire music scenes like the ska scene and the emo scene really took off there. So when I was a young dude, I was seeing my brother and his friends all going to concerts. And I was like, I want to go to concerts too. And so the first real rock concert I went to, well, I consider it my first concert, is a band called the Get Up Kids. And I saw them at this little tiny venue that didn't have a stage. It was a house in the middle of a neighborhood. And why it was sort of significant, I think this sort of probably resonates with some of your listeners, was that my brother had just gotten his driver's license. And so being the younger brother, I was 3 years younger, I was invited to go to a concert of a band that I liked with my older brother and his friends, which, as you know, we're not talking about SUVs here. We're talking about, regular 5-seater cars. You're always one friend not picking up the phone away from being not invited, right? I mean, we're talking about a venue. You walk up to the back gate, you pay maybe $6 or something, you go in. We're not talking, it's not ticketed. There's no internet. There's no, oh, I bought the ticket and it's a reserved seat. The coveted thing really is that seat in the car. That's how you get there. I don't know exactly how it all came together, but I was able to go. And I remember being super excited and walking in, and I was quite little at the time. Now I'm like 6 feet tall, but at the time I was still small. I haven't had like my growth spurt. I must have been 13 or 14, probably 13. And I sort of squeezed my way up to the front. And my brother recalls that we actually ended up holding up a mic stand that had broken at some point, which was kind of a funny little fact. That is my first concert that I think really speaks to resonating in my heart in that way. Because before that, I've been to other shows, but not in the same way. You go with your parents or something or that kind of thing.
Yeah, because the Get Up Kids, they're a punk band, right?
Yeah, emo, sort of punk. I don't know what genre people... Now, you talk to young people, they'd probably say it's a classic rock band or something. Who knows?
But yeah, you describe it as like you're right up there and you were kind of in danger of getting hit with some of the instruments as they were playing and kind of trying to hold your own. It wasn't even a stage, right? You were on the same level as the band.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. I think everything is just sort of less common now, but all the older folks, I'm not old per se, I'm 40, but like all the older folks, we sort of forget that even just 20 years ago or 30 years ago, the world was a lot less litigious. The world was a lot less buttoned up. There was a lot more sort of randomized danger lurking. And, there would be probably no recourse if a guitar hit you in the face.
Yes.
There wouldn't be, you would just have a hurt face for the night. But that kind of fun still exists somewhere in the world. It's just not readily accessible to us anymore, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds like a really cool experience. I'd mentioned to you previously, we were going back and forth with emails. I just read Jesse Rifkin's book, This Must Be the Place.
Yeah.
It's all throughout New York City and all these DIY venues. I mean, any place literally could be a venue for bands to play in, as short-lived as some of them were. But it made me think of this place just like basically a house.
Yeah.
And you walk in and boom, there's the band. I was reading about some history on that, and they had some notable bands like Jimmy Eat World, Real Big Fish, Gwen and Eric Stefani, who you mentioned, that also played there at times. So it sounds like a really cool spot to see a band if you could get in.
Yeah. I don't actually remember it ever selling out. I don't know if that was a thing. I think you would just sort of spill out of the house and into the yard. But you could always kind of like catch a glimpse somehow.
Yeah. Okay.
But also there was something really nice about bands coming through town. Bands are always coming through town. They'd play Coos Cafe. They'd play this other place called the Chain Reaction. And then there are like many, many more venues. And then the hardcore people played sort of different venues out in different spots. But there was also a real sense of these people weren't making very much money. They really wanted to be on tour. Most of them were really young, like, 18 to 22, 23 years old. They always spent time with you before the gig, after the gig, so you could talk with them and interact with them. And then if you bought a t-shirt or a CD or even like whatever they had, it was just paying for gas for them to get to the next spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of the folks coming through were not from wealthy places. So this was really something that they were doing and they really wanted to do. And I think music in general, punk style music, whatever, it got much more popular. From there, I mean, obviously this was already like the second wave of whatever you'd call punk, or maybe it was the third wave, who knows? The whole machine got a little bit more buttoned up, a little bit more. This is like the start of sort of like Vans Warped Tour and those things where it sort of got a little more buttoned up. And then soon after this, the extreme sports exploded, the X Games became a thing, and all the pop punk bands sort of rode this wave that came with that. So it was a kind of a nascent time where there was a lot of energy that was sort of bottled up and it hadn't really reached too wide of an audience. Pretty exciting.
Yeah, it sounds like a really neat experience and time to be 13 years old, checking out these bands and stuff.
Yeah, after that, we used to go to almost 2 or 3 shows a week. We went to a lot. And that continued into college because I went to music school. So in music school, I would sometimes see 2 or 3 concerts a day. So it was like pretty wild. You kind of almost overdose in music. And then I eventually made my way to Japan, where I would also go to lots and lots of concerts because I was working music industry adjacent. So I was given passes or asked, hey, you want to come? And I'm sure. So you end up seeing lots and lots of shows, and you end up seeing lots and lots of music that you don't like at all, which is also interesting.
Yeah, and that's a good segue, Benny, into your most disappointing. I guess part of it was disappointing, but cool. When you were in Japan, you checked out Megadeth.
Yes.
I wrote down the name of this place, but I'm going to butcher it here because it's Japanese. The first name is actually Makuhari.
Makarimese, yeah.
And this was what, in 2009, right?
Mm-hmm.
October 17th. And your friend or somebody,
my friend Sebastian,
got you a backstage pass or something, right? Or access to the backstage.
Yeah.
Which I would imagine was pretty cool. And you really enjoyed the show too. You said the show was fantastic.
Yes.
But then it spiraled down a little bit, I guess, but it makes for a good story. So go ahead.
So I moved to Japan after I finished college, and I spent a year in New York City working for a company that made music for TV commercials. And I went to Japan initially to study, and I spent a year studying Japanese and really enjoying just studying and sort of hanging out. And then the year after that, I came back to the US and I played bass on tour with a Sony artist for a very brief amount of time. But the artist was lovely, the bandmates were lovely, but I just really didn't like touring. I don't know, maybe I was a little anxious at that age, 22, 23. It seemed like I was sort of a backing band member because I was, but I didn't sort of like that like support feeling. I kind of was like, I want to do something on my own. So I made my way back to Japan and I started a company that did social media content for bands. And anyone who's listening is probably like, well, that seems like the most common kind of company in the world, but it wasn't in 2009, 2010. That's for sure. Instagram didn't exist. YouTube had only launched a few years before. Twitter had launched a little bit before. Facebook was a thing. So you're making content for international artists. So I kind of used that little spark of an idea and that sort of nascent company I was building to network really heavily in the music industry in Japan. So I made lots of friends that were running record labels or working in promotion and things like that, even though at the time I wasn't making music at all. And that wasn't something I was interested in doing. So being a foreigner in Japan at that time, relatively rare, I put the time in to learn Japanese. And so I made lots of friends very quickly. I was also a pretty gregarious 22, 23, 24-year-old. So that particular show, I remember very vividly because I've always been a big Megadeth fan, probably since I was 14. So right around the time I'm going to like punk venues and seeing indie artists, I discovered metal. A lot of kids that age get into metal, at least my generation. They got into metal. It's heavy, it's silly, it's kind of fun, especially Megadeth. I don't know if you've ever gone deep on Megadeth. Megadeth, it's very sort of like snarly and kind of silly in a way, especially the first 3, 4 Megadeth albums. It has sort of a swing to it. It's like doom, 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 which unlike Metallica was a little bit more straightforward. And Metallica was almost like biblical in the way that their songs would come together, very like authoritative. And Dave Mustaine, the lead singer of Megadeth, had a lot more kind of silliness and personality and the humor in the music. And that really appealed to me as like a young person. I love Marty Friedman's guitar playing as well. And that was something I loved. So I managed to keep interest in Megadeth, especially the old stuff, all the way through. Even to this day, I still will listen to Megadeth and be like, aha, yes, of course, Megadeth, this is amazing. Even though politically and all sorts of other stuff, the lead singer, Dave Mustaine, has been all over the place. There's some crazy stat he's been to rehab like 50 times or something.
Yeah, he's definitely a character for sure.
Definitely a character, definitely problematic in all sorts of ways, also pretty rad in a lot of other ways. So I had the chance to go see Slayer and Megadeth play. I think I probably begged my friend Sebastian, who was older than me and had a lot more connections than me, and he got me, I think it was like AAA backstage passes, and he and I went together. I think I had sent a note to my friend who was a huge Slayer fan, and he's like, hey, whatever you do, man, stay out of the pit. He's like, I went and saw Slayer and play in Long Beach, and I swear there were people that were coming out like covered in blood, like it was insane. And I was like, oh, okay, wow, yeah, I'll be careful. Of course, I'm seeing in Tokyo, people are so calm. They're so gentle. They're dancing, but they're like so the pit was quite tame for Slayer and for Megadeth. So the show was great. They performed super well. I watched part of it from the side of the stage. And I don't know if they still do this. And I'm sure someone listening to this is like the biggest Megadeth fan ever. And they can just send me an email being like, you got these 3 things wrong. But they had a gentleman who would control the pedals for maybe just for Dave, I don't know. But he had racks of pedals up on a shelf.
Okay.
And he would hit the pedals with his hands. He was having the best time. He was obviously the biggest Megadeth fan, and he's like the pedal guy. And so when the mood changes in the song or the different effects come in, he was like dancing, and then he would like get his hands ready and like hit the pedals. And we're talking lots of pedals. I mean, it's a metal band after all, who's put out, I don't know, 20 albums or something. So there's a lot of different effects. I'm sure they're using a lot of different things. So I watched part from the side of the stage, and it was super exciting. And I watched from the front of the stage. So after the show, we went backstage, and Sebastian was like, do you want to meet Dave? And I think that Sebastian had met Dave before. Sebastian had been in the music industry a lot longer, so he knew a lot more people. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. By the way, this is one of the last times that I ever said, oh my gosh, yes, to meet someone that I actually was interested in meeting.
Right, right.
Dave was standing at the bar in the backstage area, and it was like long, stringy blonde hair. He'd just come off stage, and he turns around, and the drink in his hand just like sloshes all over the place. And it was like he was not inebriated.
Okay.
It was not inebriated. And Sebastian, I guess, was also probably taken a little bit aback, was sort of like, "Oh, Dave, this is Benny. He's a really big fan of yours," which I don't know if that's what you're supposed to say when you get introduced to rock stars. I don't know. But he was like, "Oh, man," and he mumbled something. And I was just like, "Oh man, this is not a good moment." And then he reached into his breast pocket and he took out 2 picks and he didn't even hand them to me. He like flung them in my face, like, "Here's some picks." And I was just like, that was so cool and awful. Wow. You know what? It changed Megadeth a little bit for me,
Mm.
but I'm a lifelong non-drinker myself, personally. Never drank. Even when I just never was interested in it. I'm not exactly sure why. And it didn't make me think, "Oh, there's something wrong with that guy." I thought, "Oh, he's the real deal. Look at that. He really is the rock star. He really is, like, there he is." So that was my sort of takeaway from that. But at the time, I remember going home and just being like, "I will covet these pics, but man, I wish I hadn't met him."
Yeah, because it's like a cautionary tale. You say never meet your idol.
Yeah.
That falls into that department.
But years later, I met Marty Friedman.
Okay.
Absolute gentleman, really sweet, calm, kind, didn't mind me asking, I don't know what I asked him, a bunch of like nerdy questions about metal guitar or something that I was like rattling around in my brain, and he was very sweet and calm. So maybe Dave, if you meet him in a different context, he's sweeter and calmer. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe before the show, right?
Maybe. Who knows?
Because you also said, Benny, that when you go see live music, and I was thinking about this too, sometimes you can be really disappointed, and especially with the way ticket prices are.
Yes.
Dave's plunking down a bunch of money, and then the show's like, it's okay. And you kind of mentioned that as sometimes the show doesn't live up to your expectations.
Yeah, that can happen. I think that, I mean, so keep in mind that I make a lot of music, I record a lot of music, but I don't play live very much. I think I've played 2 shows in the last 5 years or something. And
Okay.
maybe every year I go, "Oh, next year maybe I'll play more shows," and I like don't, but maybe next year I will. So it's not so much being judgmental of what the artist is bringing, but occasionally you just have this feeling that, okay, I watched the artist perform the songs for me. And sometimes that's enough. And you're like, wow,
Yeah.
that was great. And sometimes you're like, but they're just playing the songs for me. You know what I mean? And I can't figure out if it's like really on the listener. Like your mood isn't really into it, or something is preventing you from really getting into it. Or if there is a sort of real charismatic kind of performer that, even if they are, quote, just performing the songs for you, that really, really draws you in a way, you know? And then the other side is you see music that you don't like at all, but you're totally engrossed by this. And you're just like, wow, I don't even like this music, but this is amazing.
Yeah. And you also said recorded music can be amazing too. I thought that was a good point.
I think that music school, at the Berklee College of Music, when I went there, I'm not sure how it is now. That was when I really fully understood just how carefully and deeply producers and engineers work, and how all the engineering students and the people who work on music production primarily, the level of sort of nerdy, but also the interest, was something that I did not understand when I was in high school. For example, you might find someone listening to something really earnestly, and you're like, "What are you listening to?" And they're like, "Oh, I'm listening to this, in sync track." And you're like, "You don't like pop music. You're like a jazz person. What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh, but listen to that gated snare sound. That snare sounds amazing." And you're just like, wow, that's a layer, like that's a layer that you sort of don't. So whenever I listen to music, I try to hear the harmony and the lyrics and all the things you listen to. But then if it's attractive and if you're gonna listen to it again, like listen to the bass line, listen to the way that the reverb is, listen to the stereo profile. How does it sit? Is it sit kind of crunched in the center? Does it have an expansive feel? How are the different kinds of reverb working with each other to make this sound? What's surprising about it? Because oftentimes music is very repetitive and it doesn't surprise you, but then there's layers to it that are surprising. And all these sort of like subtleties, I find that sometimes live, the subtleties aren't there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're hearing one sort of sound profile for the songs. And maybe there's some variation with they play acoustic guitar and electric guitar, but you don't have this very well put together package that was very carefully thought over. It's a little bit more like, well, this is how it sounds now, which makes sense. I mean, I have some friends who, after music school, went on to become musical directors for pop artists and for big artists. And they tour the world and play Madison Square Garden and stadiums and all these things. And those people specialize in making live shows really intriguing, have a flow of the show that makes sense, have enough space in it that makes sense, have enough variety in instrumentation. And if you understand what they're doing, they might do something like, on the record, this is one guitar, but I'm going to split into two guitar parts, and I'm going to have it split in this way, and this guitar player is going to be on a Strat, and this one's going to be on a Tele, because I want that texture. And they're like really working hard to make it a really intriguing show. So oftentimes it's not even the band's fault. It's sort of like the music direction wasn't on point, or there was too much resistance in the music direction or something that sort of didn't make it come together in a way.
Yeah, it's always impressive when a band can pull off those intricate details, like, wow, I didn't think they'd be able to do that. And somehow they accomplish, makes the show even more amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree.
You're ready to cut them some slack, and they delivered.
Yeah, you are. You're like, wow, that was surprising. For me, I think surprise is probably the number one element that I am attracted to in music that I listen to. I want to be surprised, and I want to be surprised on the 10th time I listen to it, 100th time I listen to it. If you listen to a record like Pet Sounds or something, Beach Boys,
Yeah.
I'm always surprised. Every time I hear it, I'm always like, wow. The Beatles albums too, a lot of those albums, you're just like, that's not what I expected. And I've heard this 100 times.
Yeah. Yeah. You pick up on something that you didn't hear before.
Yeah. Or the change is coming, but the change happens sooner than you sort of imagined it would. And Beatles do a lot of things where they drop beats to sort of condense things. So it feels like it should have another beat, but it doesn't. And you're always like, aha, every time. It's like, really? Like, you're really surprised that, like, ooh, that string arrangement's so nice. Oh, that cello line is so great. It's like, how many times have I heard this? But that surprise element becomes critical, I think.
Hi, this is Doug, producer of Seeing Them Live. We're going to take a short break from this episode to hear from some of our friends.
Hey everybody, it's Ray the Roadie.
And this is Hollywood Mike
with the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast, coming to you from the Illinois Rock and Roll Museum on Route 66 in Joliet, Illinois.
Where once a week we are interviewing local musicians and singer-songwriters, and the podcast itself covers a wide range of topics, including, but not limited to, the history of rock and roll in Chicago, the current state of the scene, and the challenges and opportunities facing musicians today.
So join us every Tuesday for a new exciting episode of the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast.
Hi, I'm Jessica Ann Katina. I've always loved music and surround myself with it every day. I've sung in choirs, took digital musical classes in college, and used to work in radio. To further share my knowledge and experience with others, I created this podcast, Music Notes with Jess, in 2019. I'm so fortunate of the listener growth and hearing back from some of the celebs I discussed in past episodes. That's why now I'm ready to expand. So let's have fun taking weekly music notes of throwbacks, modern hits, and media. Thank you. Talk to you soon on Music Notes with Jess.
What was the last really great rock and roll book you read? How about a good rock and roll documentary? Well, that's why I started the Rock Talk Studio podcast, the place to go for recommendations of new rock and roll books and documentaries. Give me 20 minutes and the Rock Talk Studio podcast will get you caught up on the world of rock and roll books and docs from every possible angle and leave you with a no-doubt decision on where to spend your time and money. Want to know what to read next or which film to add to your watch list? Well, here comes all the top recommendations and hidden gems you don't want to miss. I'm your host, Big Rick. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. The Rock Talk Studio podcast, your ultimate guide to discovering the best new rock and roll books and documentaries.
Hi, this is Jamie James on Seeing Them Live. We all have our first concert stories, so please share them We'd love to hear yours.
Now, back to the show.
And speaking of surprising, and you did not rehearse this, right, Benny? It just, you naturally gave a segue here to your most surprising concert, which involved some of your music, Muted Circus, right?
Yeah.
Your buddy was coming into town. He's a musician and wanted you to open for him, but you said it was going to be too hectic and nerve-wracking, so you took a pass.
That's right. So my buddy was coming to town. The night before he was supposed to play a show, I went to hang out with him and his bandmates. And I was like, hey, guys, let me play you a song I wrote. And I took a guitar and I performed a song for them that I had been working on. It's an unreleased song. I've never released it or recorded it, but it was sort of feeling it at the time. And usually I forget lyrics, but this song had very few lyrics. So it was sort of like a good moment. And then, oh, that was really nice, Benny. That was really nice. Why don't you open for us tomorrow? We could just like put you on the bill. And I was like, no, man, I want to enjoy your show. I don't want to be nervous all day. And like, then I'm not going to be really enjoying the, what we hang out before. And it's like, no, thanks. And he was like, all right, sure. It's cool. The show comes around. I'm watching the opening band hanging out. They go on, watching them, enjoying it thoroughly. I'm staying like kind of close to the back. And then there's stage banter. And all of a sudden, I realized that the stage banter includes me. And what he said was, hey, we got a special guest who's going to perform a song for you all.
Oh, my God.
His name's Benny. Benny, come on up. Sheer terror. I mean, we're not talking about Madison Square Garden here. We're not talking like a huge venue, but still, just that like sheer terror. For a brief moment, I walk up on stage. He hands me a guitar. I performed. I did not choke. I remembered all the lyrics. It went okay. But afterwards, I was like, hey, man, like, what was that about? Like, why would you do that? And he said, oh, I mean, you didn't say you weren't ready to perform. And I heard you play the song. You told me the reason why you weren't going to perform. So I thought if I just surprise you.
Yeah.
And that's true,
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's sort of like if someone said, hey, come eat dinner with me. And you'd be like, actually, man, I just ate lunch. Then I'll say, it's okay. We'll just sit at the restaurant for an hour until you get hungry. You're kind of like, oh, damn, I lost my excuse. So you took my excuse very literally. The excuse was, I don't want to be nervous. So if you're only nervous for 35 seconds as you walk onto the stage.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's a great story. So was that then like prior to 2019? Because I mentioned 2019 because that's the release of your first.
No, this was only a couple years ago.
Oh, okay.
So if you want to transition talking about Muted Circus stuff, the way Muted Circus happened for me personally probably mirrors a lot of other listeners and the other experiences. My father suddenly was terminally ill with cancer, and I hadn't really done very much music stuff for a while, for a long time, like over 10 years. And suddenly you have to deal with all these emotions. And it really reverts you back to a sort of childhood state because it's your father who's sick and dying. And so you think about parents and their value to you. And I had all these years of my life where I didn't take them for granted, but I didn't think about their imminent demise or something. And so with all that flood of emotions, as I mentioned earlier, I don't drink alcohol and I don't really do anything self-destructive. I do like chocolate, but that's sort of the only thing self-destructive. So it was like, I need to play music again. That's what I need to do. And you sort of remember, why do parents who can afford it or whatever have their kids play music lessons and stuff? You could say, oh, it's sort of like a social climbing thing, but that wasn't how it was with my family. It's just they loved music and they wanted us to love music. And so what do you do with all this emotion? You make stuff. Some people draw, some people journal, some people write some stories, some people whatever. And for me, I just started writing songs. And what I found was that I liked writing the songs, and I rented a small rehearsal space down the street from my apartment, and I would go there every Thursday morning and every Sunday morning for 3-4 hours. And it was time to be alone, and it was time to be sad, and it was time to sing to myself, and it was time to just sort of be alone with music and be alone with my thoughts. And of course, the whole time I was like, oh, I need to go to therapy. I should go to therapy. But I never did. I just sort of worked through it all. And what I found was that there was a lot of layers of emotion and there was a lot of thoughts and feelings. And I couldn't fit that into like a song or like 2 songs. And so it kept growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. And ended up being 50 songs, which is quite a lot. Half the songs are instrumental because I play strings, violin, and violin. Half the songs are acoustic or electric instruments with voice. And so that was sort of the path that I took in order to work through this. And it's just taken years to record, mix, have them mastered, and then release them slowly. And I'm coming up to the final one, the 10th one, believe it or not. Now, so many years on from my dad passing, but got to get them all out. I also have more music that I'll probably release under a different project that I also made in the meantime.
Okay, yeah, because as you're working through your grief and such, each one of these EPs kind of came about, but I noticed like some you released a couple, 2 or 3 months between releases, and then there's a span of 2 years between one of them.
Yeah,
And now it looks like maybe you've increased the release times.
sure.
It just kind of came about in that progression, or did you have a bunch of songs initially and then you kind of divided them up into the story you wanted to tell?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the release schedule doesn't really correspond with the writing or the recording so much, although I did record them sequentially and release them in that order. What happened was I really fell in love with this 5-song EP format where you do 3 vocal songs and 2 interludes. For some reason, that format really, I liked it. I think it was more ambitious than a single song, but not quite like a full album. And I also really liked writing those instrumental pieces that sat in between the other pieces. And a lot of those are really small. They're very, very small pieces of music. A couple of chords, a string line, a sort of resolution, and like that's it. So I really thought of them as interludes. So most of these EPs came together where I had 1 or 2 of these songs that I had already written, and they sort of fit together in a way. And then I had to stretch to understand what the 3rd song was going to be.
I see.
And so I would stir up the same pot of emotions and sort of be like, what is this trying to tell me? And then I would sort of bring it together for that final song. And some of them are kind of silly and like diverged from the sort of core of it. And some of them are a little bit more earnest and kind of like, yeah, this is exactly what I'm feeling. And then around the 5th or 6th EP, I actually introduced my father's voice into it. And so instead of string interludes specifically, I have 2 interludes, one of my father talking about his own death. I know it's so morbid, everyone listening being like, oh, this guy. But about my father talking about his own death, my brother recorded him talking about his own death in the car while he was in the process of dying. He wasn't dying that day in the car, by the way. And so that was really interesting. And it's really fascinating to hear a 67-year-old man who has just a very rare, very deadly brain tumor, the sort of relaxed, almost joyous moment that my brother caught of him being like living really fully in his brain, but also dying. It's a very beautiful moment. And so that EP is called Wait for What? And Wait for What is pretty straightforward. What are we waiting for? Because I don't know if you've ever been involved in this kind of situation, but everyone is sort of waiting for the person to die, even though you don't want them to die. And there's sort of a very unsettled feeling that everybody has, but everyone is waiting. It's really human thing. And I think one of the benefits of modern science is you sort of know when people are going to die more often than in the past. I think probably death was almost always pretty sudden. So, the terminal diagnosis is like a blessing in a way. Anyway, that's real downer. I don't really know exactly how to talk about this level of...
When I listen to the EPs, I like the cadence of the singing, vocal, and then the instrumental, and singing, instrumental, singing. I know I'm simplifying big time.
Well, that is exactly what it is.
In the recording of your father reading the background of these EPs, I figured obviously this has to be your father speaking, and it really fit in. And I thought it was really illuminating. Yeah, just his whole take on it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I was really a child in a certain way. And I really relied on the father figure for a lot of, it's almost like outsourced maturity, if that makes sense. And through the process of him dying, you start to understand what all the things that you were relying on this person for are, and that they're going to go away. And it sort of forces a kind of maturity that I think is very human. It's been happening for thousands of years. And I have many friends who actually lost their fathers very young, when they were 14, 15, 16, 17. And of course, I never made the connection to them, to that fact, until my own father was dying. And I started to develop this maturity in myself that I didn't know I had before. And then looking at those friends, I think, they had a certain kind of maturity that I was attracted to as a friend. And it probably is somewhat similar. And I don't know, I mean, I don't want to make some sort of like gendered statement like, oh, a man needs to whatever. But I was lucky in a way. I didn't have to face this kind of thing until I was in my 30s. But that sort of maturity, all these songs are me actually trying to put this maturity put the sort of elements of these into the music. And I think, it's hard when musicians and songwriters talk about their own work. One of the things that I didn't really hear a lot in all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of artists that I have listened to, or probably thousands, it's sort of very rare that people and the characters in songs have parents, Like you can think of like a handful of songs. Like Paul Simon has songs where people have parents, but not too many, like Bob Dylan has songs where it references people's parents. But like it actually seems like it's kind of like a rare thing.
Yeah.
And almost all the EPs, almost all the songs have references to parents and sort of how parents are influencing children, how children are thinking about parents. And like, I don't know if it's not cool in any way. It's kind of lame in a way to be like, what does like mom and dad think? But that really just shows you how, in many ways, unedited my feelings were when I was writing these. That I would write, oh, this is an EP about a girl named Lee whose mother disappears. Okay, well, that's what it's about, This is a song about a girl who feels a lot of pressure from her parents. Okay, this is a song about two children dying and their parents are mourning their loss. Okay, that's like it's really embarrassing, almost like how obvious it is. Like, I wonder if this guy was having some issues dealing with his parents,
Yeah, but I think the lyrics are such that it's not obvious.
That's good.
Makes you think, like, oh, wait. Oh, man. Yeah. These two kids are dying. Did they drown or
Yeah.
an accident, or did they do it on purpose? And yeah, like, wow, okay, that would be an interesting question to have to deal with as a parent, But yeah, I didn't find it overly obvious at all, actually.
Well, you overdosed on the music, but also, it's funny. It's like as a songwriter, especially an indie one that doesn't have like millions of listeners that are all parsing every word, like, a lot of famous artists have. I think we do overemphasize the lyrics, which makes sense in a way.
Yeah.
You sort of place a lot of emphasis on like the words that are being conveyed, but I think listeners oftentimes don't weight so heavily on the lyrical content. But that is what it is. And the song that I'm going to play for you today is the final song of the final EP.
Oh, cool.
I lived in Japan for 7 years, and I lived in New York before that, and I lived in New York after that. And the whole time up until my dad was dying, he was living in Southern California, where I grew up. And so for more than a decade or whatever, the majority of our relationship was on the telephone. And I really liked to talk to my dad, and I would call him almost every day. And when I lived in Tokyo, I'd call him in the morning. When I lived in New York and other places, I'd call him at night. And it was just sort of like a check-in call in a way. He was sort of like, I don't know, a database of like what was going on. And you're like, oh, how you doing? That kind of chit chat you hear. But we're not talking like the kinds of conversations that you hear sometimes mothers have with their daughters that go on a really long time and have lots of details. It's not really that kind of conversation. It's more like a brief check-in. And so I wrote a song called Disconnection that's just trying to capture that feeling of no more phone calls with that person, no more pick up the phone and you do that check-in, and you sort of all the things that get lost in there. And I used it as sort of device in the song that I use in other songs as well, where it starts with a personal verse. And then the second one is a little bit historical. It's a different perspective. It's a different take on it. Okay. So in this particular song, the second verse is about the very first phone call that was ever made. So it's the final phone call with someone and then the first phone call ever made. And they sort of the parallel between those. So that's a little context for what I'm going to play.
Okay, let's give it a listen.
After disconnection, a sudden stillness sweeps, an empty vacuum filling with sadness, with defeat. A voice once filled the need, a nightly check-in call to wires wound with warmness, now cold, thinned out null. I pleaded, I cajoled, please don't you go, please don't let go. I screamed it, don't hang the phone, but yell all alone, my voice flat and long, a human dial tone. Before disconnection, on the world's first long-distance call, Bell had one intention, confirm he'd been heard at all. Oh, how I felt the same. Hey there, how are you? So long as you can hear me, so long as this gets through. I pleaded, I cajoled, please don't you go, please don't let go. I screamed it, don't hang the phone, but yell all alone, my voice flat and long, a human dial tone. That's Disconnection with Pat Carr on the piano.
All right, Benny, that was great.
Thanks.
Looking forward to hearing the whole completed EP. Do you have a title for it yet?
Do I have you said a title for it yet?
Title for the EP?
I haven't decided the title and I haven't decided the release date.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
It always takes a little bit of an emotional push to get to release things.
And of course, this one will have your father's artwork on the cover.
Yes.
All of the images, I guess I would characterize them as kind of abstract. And I didn't know if they were paintings or drawings or both.
They are oil pastels. So they're crayons.
Okay.
Yeah, for the most part. Not all of them, but yeah.
Was he always doing art when you were growing up, or was that something he picked up later?
So my father immigrated to the US when he was in his early 20s, and he studied art at Pratt Institute and at Cranbrook. And eventually he went to the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And art was really everything he cared about and interested in until sometime in the 70s when he started having children and he became a city planner. So it's a really interesting thing to grow up. Our house was like an art museum in a way, lots of his art, lots of art supplies, but he never made art. It wasn't until years later when he was getting close to retirement that he decided to start making art again. So it was a really interesting gap where it was like your father's the former artist. So most of these are later works of his. His earlier works are less colorful, more black and white, more prints that he made.
Okay. Yeah, they're very interesting to look at and such. I thought it was a nice touch considering the subject matter and such. But yeah, anything else, Benny, that you'd like to talk about or where people can find you or find your music?
You can just search for Muted Circus. Very odd name. I don't think anyone else has that name out there.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, because when I searched it, it was like, boom, you popped right up. There's nothing close to it.
Yeah, maybe one day I'll tell you the story of that name.
Okay.
A little bit of intrigue.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll look forward to that. And yeah, I listened to all of your music on Bandcamp. It's all there.
Yeah, it's on Spotify, it's on Bandcamp, it's on Apple Music. I even put them on YouTube as well.
I kind of like starting with the first one and then working my way up to the present.
You are a purist, Charles. That is a tall ask for someone. Listen to 9 EPs.
Because they served up, maybe because of their popularity or they're played more. And I'm like, I just can't do it, man. I got to go in order and I take it all in.
I like albums myself. I think it might be a generation thing.
Yeah, I think it is.
Just this morning, I was listening to Peter Gabriel, and I was like, I'm going to listen to Peter Gabriel 1970, what is it, 6 or something, Cars album. And I was like, I'm going to listen to this. And I was like so tempted to be like, I want to listen to Salisbury Hill. I was like, no. Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's track 2. But you want to hear the whole statement, you know?
Right.
So I appreciate it.
Exactly.
For those listening, it is not required for you to go through all 40 songs.
Yeah.
You could skip around.
I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the lyrics and the transitions into the interludes and such, and I encourage people to check it out. Anything else, Benny, that you wanted to mention before we sign off?
Nope. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. This was really fun.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and telling your stories and sharing your unreleased music with us, and we look forward to checking out the 10th EP. That's a wrap for our show. I want to thank today's guests for sharing their concert stories with us. Make sure to check out our show notes at seeingthemlive.com for links to websites, photos, and other artifacts mentioned in the show. I also want to thank my producer, Doug Florzak. The theme music for the show was composed by Doug and is featured on his album, Flagstone. If you have a concert story you'd like to share on our podcast, please visit our website and click on Become a Guest in the main menu. Then fill out the form and click the Submit button. If you seem like a good fit for the show, we'll contact you via email. I guess it's time to head for the exits. We'll see you next time on Seeing Them Live.